be back again with James Braha. He teaches us so much along the way, and all that nitty-gritty that he gives us just by looking at the D1 chart, the Rasi chart, is phenomenal. He does that not because he's been reading astrology, but because of his practical experience with thousands of charts that he's seen, and his books that he's reviewing now and which are available on Amazon for all of us to see. And that's an ebook, so you can buy the ebook copy, as well as you can also buy, I think, the hardbound copy. James, do you have a copy so that we can show it to our viewers here?
The one that just came up on ebook is called How to Be a Great Astrologer. And it's Western astrological aspects, but it's really, even if you're doing Hindu Vedic, it's got all the conjunctions. It's got plenty of material. This is the aspects. The other one, the Art and Practice of Ancient Hindu Astrology, that's the 2-volume set. That's on ebook. That's the one that I wrote after 20 years in the practice. Now, I'm working on this one. This was my first book. It's called Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite chapters.
This is the first book, and it came out in 1986. I have been working, updating it for the last 4-5 months, and I've got a lot more to go. I've changed the planets in the houses, updated them. I mean, it's amazing to go back and see what I knew after practicing for 4 or 5 years versus 35 years. It's going to be it's already way better, but I'm now in the section of analyzing horoscopes, and I'm telling you, it's like the material in the advanced book, The Art and Practice of Ancient Hindu Astrologer. It's similar to that, only it's
more deeper.
Yeah, it's even better, because that book, remember, was written some years ago as well. Anyway, enough said. And they can buy that, by the way. The best place to buy my ebooks, if possible, is a website called BookBaby. BookBaby. They have it. Okay. So
what are you going to share with us today?
Well, we have some horoscopes, but before I get, I want to talk about Robert De Niro, because Robert De Niro, he won 2 Oscars, but the best role he won when he was in Mercury, Venus, Dasha Bhukti. They form a Raja Yoga. Flash forward 20 or 30 years, that was Mercury, Venus. Now he's in Venus, Mercury. And they're coming out with a film called The Irishman, and he has the lead. There's a strong chance that he may win the Oscar or at least be nominated. So we're going to talk about that. But before I get to his chart, I want to get the pet peeves. See, I have pet peeves with astrology that I like to teach because I keep hearing things that I disagree with. And if I get all these pet peeves out, I might be able to die peacefully and teach something at the same time.
Right. And just so that you know, we don't really want you to disappear from the planet quite so soon. We still want a lot of knowledge from you.
I have plenty of years left. So these are going to be just a few, these will be just completely different points, but they're little tips. And remember, I'm not a scholar, as you said. I am a practicing astrologer more than a scholar. I don't go around reading the stuff. I try to find what other astrologers have experienced, and mainly I go by my own experience, which takes a long time. And it's really frustrating because for so many years, I would have a belief, like when I used to talk about Mercury, Jupiter, it kept Mercury, Jupiter conjunctions when they're very tight. They cause problems to the nervous system. But for so many years, I would not allow that because I thought, well, these are two benefics. And I would see, oh, that's not working so good. It took so long to get rid of the concept. I forget the concept. If it doesn't work, you have to show how it works.
Right.
Anyway, so just a few points that I want to say. Many times people will be looking for some effect that occurred in their life. They will go to the Dasha system and they will, They will not really see anything in the Dasha Bhukti that points to what happened. But because they believe that everything should be showing up in the horoscope, they will go to what's going on and they'll say, well, it must be that. This should never be done. If you can find it legitimately, that's fine. But if it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense. And I say this because the key is to remember there are 40 dasha systems. 40. Now, of the 40, there's probably only 6 or 7 or 8 that are taken seriously for the natal horoscope. But even the fact that there are different dasha systems means you're not going to find everything necessarily from the dasha system that you're using. So don't say, well, I was in Venus Mercury and my aunt died, so it means that when you have Venus Mercury, your aunt dies. You can't do that. Okay? Okay. Another thing I want to mention, which is interesting, comes completely from experience. This is not a happy thought, but it's my experience. It took a long time to notice it's much easier to predict accurately when you see something negative in the horoscope, for me. So if I see, oh, a bad period is coming, you're going to need mantras, you're going to need yagyas. The bad period comes a year later, I get an email, you were right, the bad period has occurred, etc., etc. But when I find, oh my God, something fantastic is coming, occasionally, yes, but not as often as it should be. I never taught this. I never wanted to say it publicly because it's not very pleasant. But after a while, it hasn't changed. Over the decades, it hasn't changed. Oh, you got something great happen, and it happens 90%. It hasn't changed. It happens occasionally, but not as often. My conclusion, and take it for what it's worth, my conclusion is that in Kali Yuga, this is the way it is, because part of what happens is that when people have, every time we have difficulties and we have suffering and we get beaten down, as we get older, we get beaten down, and so sometimes even when the good periods come, the people don't make the most of it. This is also why I tell people, if they're in a bad period, a really bad period, and then it's going to be over, maybe it's 2 or 3 years really bad, or maybe it's 10 years that are really bad. If it's a really bad period and it's ending and they're coming to a decent period, I tell them to throw a big party the day that it ends. Throw a party. Tell everybody the bad times are over. Let the subconscious know it, because otherwise it takes the person 3 or 4 months, 8 or 10 months, and then they say, oh, I think life might be getting back to normal. Now,
yes. So
another
you
thing,
believe in the theory of subconscious. Just a word before we go on. So you do believe in the theory of subconscious.
I don't consider it a theory. I mean, it's in practice, people will say, I want a relationship, but all of their actions, let the person know, I'm not available, I'm not available. That's the subconscious. You can call it what you like.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So another thing is the 7 in 10 rule. This is going to be called Braha's 7 in 10 rule. The rule is, you need, if you are beginning to see some particular influence and you see, oh, when this happens, then the person buys a car, or when this happens, the person loses a job. You need to see that in 6 or 7 cases out of 10. Otherwise, you shouldn't be committed to memory, because it needs to, for things to work, they have to work most of the time. For example, Rahu, the Rahu Dasha. When the Rahu Dasha hits, some people are fine. There's no changes. I would say it's 60 or 70% of the people, 6 or 7 out of 10 charts, they hit Rahu, all hell breaks loose, like that. A person that has Kalasarpa yoga, not always, but oftentimes the troubles will be related to the houses where Rahu and Ketu. in other words, if Rahu's in the 5th house and Ketu's in the 11th, and it's a Kalasarpa yoga, not in all cases, but in a good amount, it will be connected to 5 and 7, the problems. Another thing is the Atmakaraka. This really burns me. The Atmakaraka in the Parashara system is the sun. It represents the soul. So when I do a reading for people, I start out by giving an overview of the chart to let them know that, oh, he knows what he's doing. I won't be perfect, but they'll go, oh, he knows what he's doing. Then I will say the most important influences in the Hindu chart are the 1st house and the moon. And I will go over the 1st house, how it's aspected, what the ruler is doing, etc. Then I will go into the moon, because the moon and the 1st house ruler, those are going to dominate the chart. After that, the most important influence is the sun, because it's the soul, it's the Atmakaraka. Now, in the Jaimini system, the planet in the highest degree is the Atmakaraka system. That's in the Jaimini system. So, in my opinion, I don't think it's helpful to talk about the planet in the highest degree as the Atmakaraka. For one thing, I have noticed in the Jaimini system, the Atmakaraka, the dasha of the planet holding the Atmakaraka is not so good. In my experience, and I talk to other people, they say, yeah, the Atmakaraka doesn't mean that you're going to have a great dasha. So I'm just saying, at least if you're going to consider the planet in the highest degree, it's not necessarily the soul. It's a different thing. That's how I see it. Another thing that you don't necessarily find in the Hindu system, and I've mentioned this before, is that the 8th house has something to do with sex. Because the 8th house is the house of Scorpio. Technically speaking, and it's in all my books, the 12th house is sexual enjoyment. Because the 12th house is bed pleasures. I have the moon in the 12th house. I love the bedroom. I can watch TV in the bedroom. I can eat a meal in the bedroom. My wife thinks I'm crazy. This is the bedroom. It's for sleeping. But my moon is there. I love the bedroom. So the bedroom is considered everything that happens in the bedroom. That's also sexual enjoyment. But the 8th house also relates to sex. And I wanna mention something that is extremely important. The amount of women that are sexually assaulted is off the charts. It's been this way for God knows how long. It's still that way. But when I'm doing horoscopes and I see the charts of a woman who has a very powerful 8th house, that basically means that they have a sexy appearance. Anybody it could be a man as well. The 8th house is very strong. They have a very sexy appearance because they're very full of life. But in my experience, I hear more women that were assaulted or girls that were assaulted when they're young because they have this very powerful 8th house. So to all the parents out there, if you have daughters that have very prominent 8th houses, protect them, don't leave them alone, because they will be more of a target than other girls. That's just been my experience. Another note about Rahu and Ketu. When I'm doing horoscopes and I'm talking about aspects, people will often say, well, I'll be talking about, let's say that Rahu is in the 7th house, right? And they'll say, yes, and Ketu is aspecting the 7th house. This is absurd. It doesn't work that way. If it now, or the 1st house holds Ketu, yes, and the 1st house is being aspected by Rahu. This is absurd. They throw aspects on the 7th and 9th. Here's how you know it's absurd. They represent the exact opposite of each other. If Rahu is in the 7th house, the partner is domineering, smothering, intense, or worldly powerful. They are not metaphysical. I mean, they are not the spouse. Ketu's in the 1st house. Rahu is in the 7th. The spouse is powerful, intense, smothering. The spouse is not metaphysical, spiritual, psychic, and shy and introspective. That's Ketu in the 1st house. Do not use Rahu to aspect its opposite house. and Ketu to aspect its opposite. It's absurd. Okay.
Right.
Um,
It's a very beautiful point, because generally we do say, yeah, and Ketu is aspecting it. But Rahu is there, Rahu is all enveloping, and Ketu is there, he's all enveloping in his, very, very distinct in his jurisdiction, and Rahu is also very distinct in his way. So they don't even mingle.
and when I'm doing horoscopes for people that study astrology or for people that know astrology, every couple of months or so, I have to hear this and I have to explain it. And even then, I don't know if they're hearing it or not. So think about it. If Rahu's in a house, it's not acting like Ketu's in that house. Anyway.
No, you make a lot of sense there. That makes a lot of sense for us to understand and to just get it in a right frame of mind.
It's very important. Okay, so let's look at Robert De Niro's horoscope.
Right.
So they are making this movie. So Martin Scorsese, the director, has worked with Robert De Niro over the last 40 years, and they have made several mafia films.
Yeah,
and
before we go on, I'd just like to say that James does give a lot of readings for people. If you are interested, you can consult him, and you can send a mail on jamesbraha@gmail.com. He, as this PPT shows, is invariably on the bullseye. So do really go and get your readings done if you're interested.
And they can go to jamesbraha.com to see my website as well. So this is, yeah, we want Robert De Niro. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to mention that ultimately, if you're actually going to practice astrology, you should get a program where the degrees are next to the planets so that you can see the degrees. This is something that when I was in India, the astrologers, they would just say Jupiter's aspecting the 5th house, Saturn's aspecting the sun. But you need to know, is Saturn aspecting the sun within 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 20 degrees, 25 degrees? The degrees are critical if you want to be accurate. So this movie that they're doing, they've been trying to get it made for 12 years. It cost $125 million because they need to show them at a younger age, and that's called CGI, and it's cost a fortune. But it has all the actors that make it look like we're coming to a very big film. Now, Robert De Niro, the first thing I'll mention, and then we'll go over the chart a little bit, but he has this Raja Yoga of Mercury, Venus in the 3rd house. This horoscope is so oriented toward the 3rd house, it can hardly be emphasized enough. The sun is in its own sign in Leo in the 3rd house. There's a tight Raja Yoga. Mercury, Venus for a Gemini ascendant forms a Raja Yoga. And the Raja Yoga is tight. They're not 10 degrees away, 20 degrees away. They're 2 degrees away. It's very, very, very tight. And the 3rd house is aspected by the full moon.
Right.
And in the Dasamsha chart, in the career chart, the 10th house ruler Venus is in the 5th house, which is the other house of the arts. When you look at this horoscope, you know, there's 7 planets and Rahu and Ketu. There are 6 planets connected to the 3rd house. The sun, Mercury, Venus, that's 3 planets in the 3rd house. Mars aspects the 3rd house.
Right.
The moon, the full moon aspects the 3rd house. And Saturn aspects. That's 6 planets connected to the 3rd house. Even though it's Mars, even though it's Saturn, if it was just Saturn, that would not be good. But this is not the same. Not the same. Another thing that I want to mention, which is a little tip, is that whenever you see a planet in the 1st degree of the sign, and I believe it may be the 1st and 2nd degree, and it may be the 29th and 30th degree, that planet is likely to be in the same sign, whether good or bad, it'll be in the same sign in 10 or 12 of the Varga charts. So I use a system where there's different Varga systems. I use a system where there's about 21 Varga charts. The sun in Leo, which is in the first degree, is in its own sign Leo 11 times in the Varga charts. 11 times it's in Leo, and it's exalted 5 times. As if the sun is not strong enough in Leo conjunct
Mercury,
a Raja Yoga aspected by a full moon. It's strong enough, and this happens also with another famous actor, Jack Nicholson, has the exalted sun in the 10th house, and it winds up to be many, many, many times, in good Vargas. Anyway, so when he won 2 Oscars, one for The Godfather and one for Raging Bull. Raging Bull was the best actor, the other was best supporting. Raging Bull is considered one of the greatest movies and greatest performances ever. He won that in the Mercury-Venus Dasha Bhukti. Now you flash forward, and he is now in Venus-Mercury. Now they are different. Mercury-Venus would be stronger for Mercury, which is the first house ruler and the 4th house ruler, because it's Mercury picking up the positive energy from Venus. So the strongest would be the Mercury houses, Gemini and Virgo, and being that Gemini is the ascendant, that looks like fame, of course. But it also, simply having a Raja Yoga, a tight Raja Yoga, run its Dasha Bhukti, and they're in the 3rd house, you're going to see some tremendous 3rd house effects. The 3rd house is the arts, it's the willpower, it's brothers and sisters, like that. Anyway, now he's in
subconscious mind, your artistic abilities. So, as you just said.
So, yeah, I don't do much in the horoscope with the subconscious. To me, as somebody who started with Western astrology, I use the Western 12th house for that. But you're welcome to use the 3rd if it works for you. The Venus Mercury Dasha Bhukti, he's actually been in Venus Mercury February 2017 until December 2019. He's done some movies in the last couple of years. They haven't been anything special. They haven't been anything great. He hasn't gotten any recognition. But remember, Saturn has been transiting Sagittarius, the 7th house. So yes, he's been in a good Dasha Bhukti of Venus and Mercury, but Saturn has been aspecting the ascendant. Okay? Now, the film is coming out in November. Guess what's happening in November?
Saturn transits to Capricorn.
Saturn's going to go into Capricorn
in this January.
Actually, with my computer, February. But anyway, in November, when the film comes out, Jupiter goes into the 7th house, and now the ascendant is not bombarded by Saturn. So the way I see it, when Saturn is transiting a house, it causes troubles, and the houses it aspects causes troubles. The house opposite, in this case the 7th and the 1st, they would be, it would hurt both the 7th and the 1st. When Saturn gets in there, I consider it basically Jupiter will neutralize the difficulty. In other words, Saturn will not have sway, Jupiter will not have sway. They'll basically kind of cancel each other out, neutralize each other. So we'll see what happens. But this film, they finished the filming of the scenes a year ago. It's mid 2019 right now. They finished the shooting in mid 2018, and the film hasn't come out. And it's still not coming out until Jupiter goes in there. I think it's going to have a big impact for his life. We'll see. But the horoscope is fascinating to me. as well, because they asked his mother, how did your son do it? This was, decades ago, when he burst on the scene and, became very famous in the first 10, 15 years. They said, how did he do it? And she said, by sheer force of will. By sheer force of will. He left home to go to Europe when he was young, before he was famous. And he said, when I come home, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with my life. Came home and said, I'm going to be an actor. And it was, anyway, that's the third house, the willpower. And if you watch his acting, it's all about the strong will of his characters. The other thing I find so fascinating about this chart is how introspective and introverted and shy this man is. He's finally able to utter a few words in interviews in his 70s. But in his 30s and 40s and 50s, he couldn't open his mouth. In fact, I read a book, and it said his father was very inarticulate and his mother was very quiet. Between the two, he just very shy, and you would never know it. And people say that when they see him on the street, people have seen him, and someone will say, that was Robert De Niro. They go, what? Because they don't see the charisma, they don't see any of that. That's the Saturn in the first house. That's the Saturn. But in the Dasamsha chart, the 10th ruler is Venus. It's in Taurus in the 5th house, which is the arts. And Rahu is in the 10th house, giving a big career. In the natal chart, Jupiter and Rahu aspect the 10th house. And I want to emphasize this, because when you look at the aspects of Rahu, yes, Rahu's a malefic, but predominantly Rahu is a serpent beast that wants all the power it can get. So when it throws the aspect onto the 10th house, that's a powerful aspect for the 10th house. When it aspects the 5th house, yes, it's an affliction to the 5th house, but that can make a child that you have powerful and worldly and successful. It doesn't help the peace of mind for Rahu to aspect the 5th house, but for children it will be good. So you have to be able to see, not to take things so simplistically.
Yeah, it's not black and white. It's good, bad, and the ugly, and you need to take all of three of them together with each other, right?
Amen. Exactly. That's exactly right. So Jupiter aspects the 10th house. It's aspecting its own sign, Pisces. That's going to strengthen it. The 10th, now look at this. Rahu is aspecting the 10th house. Jupiter is aspecting its own sign, the 10th house. The 10th house ruler, Jupiter, is conjunct within 5 or 6 degrees with Rahu. Rahu's aspect on Jupiter is not going to help with gurus and spiritual teachers and foreigners and the liver. But Rahu's aspect on Jupiter as the ruler of the 10th house, it's telling you the 10th ruler is next to this worldly powerful Rahu. So this chart is just enormously strong, and you can see why somebody like this would be enormously famous. Also, the second house is speech, and he's got Jupiter and Rahu in the second house, and that's going to allow him to speak very powerfully and very intensely. And the moon, the main thing to understand about this moon is that it's a full moon, and the aspect it's throwing onto Mercury is within 4 degrees. That moon-Mercury aspect is giving such communication skills, and the moon is also aspecting Venus. The full moon is aspecting Venus. This is making Venus, the arts, even more strong. And the Venus moon aspect is also going to make him very luscious and sensual, the sexual. I'm going to be talking in the next interview, I'm going to be talking about Martin Luther King, who has a Moon-Venus conjunction. And there was a lot of sexual activity. The FBI, you know,
Just, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a lot of sexual. Whenever Venus and Moon aspect each other, conjunct, opposite, or even if they're at an angle from each other, there's going to be very strong sexual experiences. Yeah. So, so this is going to be interesting. Now, Robert Deniro is getting a divorce. It's been in the news. Saturn's going to go into the 8th house in February, the house of money from partners. So if I were seeing Robert Deniro as a client, I would say, strike a deal for the alimony or divorce settlement. Do it before Saturn gets in the 8th house. Because when Saturn gets in the 8th house,
you lose it
going
all.
to, huh?
You lose it all.
Well, it's going to be worse. You see, the way Saturn works is, if he were to go and say, I will give you X amount of dollars, when Saturn is not in the 8th house, it's not in the 8th house from the moon, it's not aspecting the ruler of the 8th house from the, Saturn's not doing anything with the 8th house right now. So if they make offers, it's possible that they would accept something that he could live with. When Saturn gets into that, 8th house, and then he says, I'll give you this much. The way Saturn reacts is, nope, sorry. Can you give an inch? Can't give an inch. That's Saturn. So if he could get it over with now, that would certainly be better. But from November of this year, when Jupiter gets into the 7th, until November of next year, Jupiter will be aspecting the ascendant and the ascendant ruler. Okay? And so, and of course the Sun, Venus, Mercury, but the fact that Saturn has been aspecting his ascendant for 2 years, that's not very pleasant. And the troubles in marriage for the last couple of years and the divorce, Saturn will get out of the way. Jupiter will go into the 7th house. He'll probably fall in love with somebody. Jupiter will be in the 7th house and he'll be able to breathe again. But from having this restriction on the personality, that's going to go away. Jupiter will aspect the ascendant, the Sun, and the ascendant ruler. So 2020 should be a good year for him, I would say.
Yeah. So you do. So the transits also taken into account when you are doing the future readings. And
if you do not look at the transits, you'll never get the Dasha Bhuktis correct. I had a chart yesterday. This man had a Mercury Dasha that just began. It just began. And Mercury is 2 degrees away from Venus, conjunct, and Mercury is aspected by Jupiter from a 9th house aspect. This Mercury, even though it's in a bad sign in Sagittarius, Mercury doesn't do well opposite its own sign, Gemini. But Mercury is a few degrees away from Venus, aspected within 2 or 3 degrees by Jupiter. This is going to be the best dasha of his life. You know what I said to him? He said, when does it begin? I said, it already began. And you haven't felt a damn thing. He said, no, I haven't. The reason he hasn't felt anything is because that Mercury is sitting in like 19 or 20 degrees of Sagittarius. Saturn's been sitting on that
Right.
Mercury. Saturn's been sitting on the Mercury. I said, you're not going to feel a thing good until November. You get to November, Saturn is sitting on the Mercury Venus, but Jupiter's there too. It will be neutral. And the dasha is really good. So he'll begin to see, oh, something's changing. When he gets to February, and then when he gets to February and Saturn's out of the way and Jupiter is there, then the dasha can take off. The dasha cannot do any good. I see, this is so sad to me. I sometimes see a tremendous dasha bhukti. a period, sub-period, that's going to be 2 years or 3 years. It's really good. And Saturn is sitting there. They will not see it. This is extremely important because the word has always been, and I can see myself way back in 1983 sitting with Padya and saying, which is more important? Even with Santanam, before that, 82, which is more important, the Dasha Bhukti, or the transit? The Dasha Bhukti is more important. This was 40 years ago. I didn't understand. I understand, of course, the Dasha is more important than a transit. It's going to go on for 16 years. But I thought that it meant, ooh, it's a great Dasha, and even when Saturn's hitting it, it won't matter. It will matter. It'll matter a lot. Okay? So you've got to look at the transits, and that's why I say that I think Robert Deniro is going to have a really good 2020.
Right. So you say, and it's also Saturn would also be in. Do you believe in trines concept, James? Do you really believe in the trines concept? Because in Western astrology they do. So with the Vedic astrology, do you believe in the trines aspect? Planets in trines to each other help each other.
This is a hysterical question. Everything that works in the Western chart with aspects is going to work with the Hindu Vedic. I would never tell somebody to mix the systems, but of course they work. If I see, let's say that Robert Deniro has Saturn in 1 degree of Gemini. If the moon or Venus was in 1 degree, if the moon or Mercury was in 1 degree of Virgo, that's a square. That's a 90-degree aspect. I see this all the time. And I'll tell the person, I'll say, look, Saturn is not aspecting your ascendant ruler in the Hindu, but I can tell you Saturn is aspecting that in the Western chart, and you're getting destroyed and hammered and massacred by it, and that will be accurate. So, of course the trines work. Of course all the Western aspects work. But I don't think that we should, I mean, this is why, if you go back, the first book I wrote was Ancient Hindu Astrology for the Modern Western Astrologer. The very next book I wrote was called Astrologos. It had a different subtitle. Eventually it was Astrologos, Language of Life. Now it's called Astrologos, Reflections of a Hindu Astrologer, or something like that. And in that book I said, you've got to know both systems. If you know, don't mix them, but if you know both systems, you're going to be so much more accurate. So yes, the trines work, and the squares work, and the sextiles work, and the quincunxes work. But I wouldn't say to mix them. I would say, and very few people, I can tell you, very few people have followed my lead of learning both. And the reason they don't learn both is because of a lack of confidence. It's because of a mistake of the intellect. The mistake of the intellect is that they think that when they look at a horoscope, they're supposed to know everything. They don't know half of what's going on, and that's fine. When you get the client, you tell them the half that you know. You tell them the half that you know. You don't spend 30 years learning one system. I mean, you can, but once you know the essence of a system pretty well, you can learn the other system and you can start to use them. But you know, that's my feeling. That's how I do it.
It was a very beautiful chart, and it was very beautifully done, analyzed. My take here was that Saturn, if your Dasha Bhukti is good, but if Saturn is sitting right there on your Dasha Bhukti planets, wait for Saturn to pass off. So with Deniro's chart, we see that, as James said, once Saturn in transit moves to his 8th house, his luck is going to prosper more and more. So with that note,
wait, but there is one problem. The Mercury Venus was wasted for the most part. The Venus Mercury was Venus Mercury was February 2017 until December 2019. He's only getting the benefit when it hits November. Now, he made the movie. I'm sure the movie's great. Starting in November, he can get the benefit. By the time the Oscars come around, that's in February, then he'll be in Venus Ketu. We'll see. But, so, yeah, he's lost a lot of the benefit of that. But November, the film comes out. It should be a big splash for him.
Yeah, and as James said, that sometimes it's bad to see that a good, and this has been in the last few minutes, as James said, that this has been a living example that a good Dasha Bhukti going waste because of certain transits. You really do need to see one of the things is transit and Dasha Bhukti together for a very correct prediction. With
Yes.
that, sign off. James, thank you so much. We'll meet again in the next session with the chart of Mars in King Yogini. Till then, have a great day.